I don't do book reviews on this channel, but this channel exists because 5 years ago I fell in love with Quentin Tarantino's films and decided to dive into this world of cinema. Hence, I think it's fair for me to talk about Quentin Tarantino's books. Initially, the video was going to be only about Tarantino's latest book, Cinema Speculation, but I realized that I don't really have a lot to say about this book. So I thought I should talk about both of Quentin Tarantino's books, that is Cinema Speculation and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, starting with the. It took me more than 1 year to complete this book. It's not the book's fault. It's a great read with a fairly simple and understandable language, and honestly, it's pretty good. The first few chapters of this book are Tarantino's own first hand experiences of watching and discovering films from a very young age. Reading those chapters was quite a lot of fun because it gave me a glimpse into Quentin Tarantino's early life. But as the book goes on, it dives deep into talking about films, their production process, initial casting choices, initial director choices, production hassles, etc. There are a few instances in which Quentin Tarantino writes about how certain things in certain films impacted his own approach to filmmaking. But when the book dives into deep details about a film, especially what went on behind the scenes, it became a tough read for me. But that's not the book's shortcoming, rather the result of me growing up in a very different culture. For example, when I was young, the adults in my family used to watch and talk about the films of Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, Mr. Dev Anand, Mr. Rajesh Khanna. Hence, if I read the names of actors of Hindi films from the 60s, 70s and 80s, I have a visual reference. Reading the name Rajesh Khanna generates an image of Mr. Khanna in my mind. Even though I have not seen all the films of the actors of 70s and 80s, yet I'm well aware of who these actors were and what they looked like. But that was not the case while I was reading Cinema Speculation. Knowing Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, Clint Eastwood, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, and countless other Hollywood legends was not enough for me to be able to read and appreciate the works of one of the most legendary film enthusiasts of all time. In this book, Quentin Tarantino talks about the films I didn't even know existed, with actors I have never even heard of, in such excruciating detail that reading this book became really exhausting. It took me more than 1 year to read this book because reading names like John Boorman and Robert Evans created no image in my mind. Well, I could see Matthew Good as Bob Evans, but that was not enough. I had to use Google so much just to read a book, and even Google failed at times when the book went into details about a film's plot. How am I supposed to appreciate Tarantino's writing about the plot of a film I had never even heard of, with the names of actors I have no visual reference for and no faces to imagine? Exactly. From time to time, the book talks about some people and movies that I know and love, but this book is by Quentin Tarantino and about the films and movies and people that he loves. Cinema Speculation is a book that requires its readers to be well equipped with the cultural knowledge of Hollywood and the film industry, which I certainly am not. Reading this book for the first time was quite a challenge. But once I have watched the movies, at least the ones mentioned in this book, a reread of this book would be much more satisfying. That's why I said I cannot review Cinema Speculation, because I am not fully equipped to understand, appreciate or criticize this book by Quentin Tarantino. A lot of people have the misconception that this book is the official novelization of the 2019 movie. The novelization of a film is written mostly in chronological order in novel form, exploring the character's thought process in a particular scene that we saw in the film. That being said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a novel by Quentin Tarantino, is not the official novelization of the 2019 film. It's a separate entity exploring the late 60s lifestyle of Hollywood, giving us instances from day-to-day lives of several characters other than Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth. The climax of the film is a high point. But in the book, it's just mentioned in passing as a news. The book does not dive deep into the details or tries to recreate the scene on the page. That's just an example to tell you that the narrative style and the structure of the book is very different from those of the film. The book is quite immersive, even though while reading this, I faced some of the problems I faced while reading cinema speculation, but not too much. There are a few instances in this book in which Tarantino mentions himself as Trudy Fraser, who's a fictional character in the film and the book, grows up and works on a film with Quentin Tarantino and goes on to win an Oscar for the said film. Some people might find it a bit odd and self absorbed, but I just loved it. The book also gives us an account of what happened to Cliff Booth's wife, something which is just a speculation in the movie, and I will not spoil it for you here. There is one instance in this book that I absolutely love. It is from the point of view of Sharon Tate, and Tarantino writes about the filmmaking genius of Roman Polanski. I don't know if it happened for real or not, but it's one of my favorite parts in the book. She remembers an incident that happened on the set of Rosemary's Baby, which drove this point home. The cinematographer Billy Fraker had set up a shot. It was of Ruth Gordon's character, Mrs. Castweth. She is in Rosemary's apartment and she asks to use the phone in the other room. Rosemary tells her to go into the bedroom and make the phone call. So Mrs. Castweth sits on the bed and talks for a moment on the telephone. And the shot was Rosemary's perspective for a quick glance of the old woman in her bedroom making the call. So Billy Fraker set up the camera in the hallway and lined up the camera to shoot Ruth Gordon through the doorway. And the way Fraker lined up the shot, you could clearly see Ruth Gordon framed between the two sides of the door. When Roman looked through the viewfinder, he didn't like it, so he adjusted it. When they did what Roman wanted, Mrs. Castwet wasn't clearly framed. She was obscured by the left side of the doorway. When Sharon looked through the camera viewfinder, she always looked at Roman's shot through the viewfinder. She couldn't understand why Roman changed it. If the shot was meant to be of Mrs. Castwet, it clearly wasn't as good as the earlier one. She was cut in half. The cinematographer couldn't understand it either. But Roman was the director, so Fraker did what he was told. While Roman sat on an apple box sipping coffee from the white styrofoam cup, as the camera crew readjusted the camera, Sharon asked him why he changed the shot. Roman just gave her a knowing elfin grin and said, "You'll see." Then he got up and scooted away. Whatever the hell that means, Sharon thought. Then she forgot about it till 6 months later. The two of them were together at the very first audience test screening, which was being held at Alex Theatre in Glendale, California. Roman and Sharon sat towards the back of the auditorium holding hands. Roman, who usually liked to sit closer to the screen when he watched other people's movies, liked to sit towards the back when he watched his own, because he was watching the audience even more than he was watching the movie. The cinema was packed. The scene with Mrs. Castwet in Rosemary's apartment came on. Ruth Gordon asks Mia Farrow if she could use the phone in the other room. Mia says yes and points towards the bedroom. Roman leaned closer to his wife and whispered to her, "You remember when you asked me why I changed the shot?" She had forgotten it, but she remembered now. "Yes, watch this," he said, and pointed. But he didn't point at the screen. He pointed instead at the whole sea of heads that sat before them, about 600 of them. On screen, Mia Farrow as Rosemary takes a glance at the old woman in her bedroom, and the movie cuts to what she sees, which is the shot of Ruth Gordon as Mrs. Castwet sitting on the bed talking on the phone, partly obscured by the left-hand door frame. Then suddenly Sharon witnessed all 600 heads in front of her lean slightly to the right in order to see around the door frame. Sharon let out a small gasp at the sight. Of course, they couldn't see any better by moving their heads. The shot was the shot. Nor did they intellectually note they leaned to the right. They did it instinctively. So Roman had manipulated 600 people, and soon that number would grow to millions all over the world to do something they would never do if they were thinking. But they weren't thinking. Roman was doing the thinking for them. Why did he do it? Because he could. So great. Overall, even though I do not have a conclusive statement on Quentin Tarantino's second book, his first book is really, really great, with a great amount of detail and world building. I read Once Upon a Time in Hollywood back in March of 2022. I revisit parts of this book from time to time, and it's a very, very entertaining read. Reading both of Quentin Tarantino's books has given me a clear picture of what sheer love and passion for cinema looks like. I will always be grateful to Quentin Tarantino for pulling me into this world of films. And I will always be grateful to him for letting me know that I know absolutely nothing about this world, that I haven't even scratched the surface. Why did he do it? Because he could. So great. Do you remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember how passionately I shared this part of this book with you? Do you understand what it meant for me to give this book to you, to keep? I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you're not even watching this video right now. But if you are, I hope you remember all of this. I hope Rosemary's Baby haunts you. I hope Hereditary haunts you. I hope every horror film that I have told you about haunts you. I hope you are haunted by every shitty film that your friends recommend you. I hope you are haunted by every great film you will never get to see because you chose to leave me. I hope that when you come back from a movie night with your husband and the movie he made you watch was a shitty one, I hope you look in the mirror and cry. Cry thinking about me and all the great films I would have taken you to. Let that sink in.